The sun had already stolen every drop of moisture from her cracked lips by the time Beckett Calloway found her lying face down in the dried-up creek bed, more skeleton than woman, her fingers still clutching at the dusty earth, as if she had been trying to crawl somewhere before her body finally gave out. He had been riding the trail between Bozeman, Montana, and the neighboring ranches for near about 6 years now, delivering supplies and checking on the scattered homesteads that dotted the territory in this summer of 1882, and he had seen plenty of hard things in his time. But something about the way this woman lay there, her dark hair matted with dirt and her dress torn to ribbons, made his chest tighten in a way he could not quite name. Beckett was 27 years old, broad-shouldered and weathered from years of honest work, and he had learned long ago that the Montana wilderness did not forgive weakness or hesitation. He dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud as he tied his horse to a nearby scrub brush. The woman did not move when he approached, and for a terrible moment he thought she might already be gone. But when he knelt beside her and gently turned her over, he saw the faint rise and fall of her chest, so shallow it was barely there at all. Her face was gaunt, the bones prominent beneath skin that had been burned raw by the relentless sun. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, he guessed, though it was hard to tell in her condition. Beckett did not waste time with questions or speculation. He uncorked his canteen and carefully lifted her head, letting just a few drops of water touch her lips. Too much too fast could be dangerous. His father had taught him that years ago when they had found a lost prospector in similar condition. The woman's eyelids fluttered but did not open. Her lips parted slightly, and he gave her a bit more water, watching as her throat worked weakly to swallow. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "You are safe. I have got you." He knew he needed to get her out of the sun immediately. The July heat was brutal, the kind that could kill a healthy man if he was not careful, and this woman was far from healthy. Beckett glanced around and spotted a cluster of cottonwood trees about 50 yards away, their leaves offering blessed shade. He lifted her as carefully as he could, shocked at how little she weighed. She was all sharp angles and fragile bones, and he could feel her heart beating against his chest like a frightened bird. Under the cottonwoods, he laid her down on a patch of grass that still held some green despite the summer drought. He took his bedroll from his saddle and fashioned a makeshift pillow for her head, then dampened his handkerchief and began gently cleaning the dirt from her face. She stirred slightly at his touch, a small sound escaping her throat that might have been a whimper or might have been relief. Beckett had some jerky in his saddlebag, but he knew she could not handle that yet. Instead, he pulled out the small pouch of cornmeal his landlady had packed for him that morning. He built a quick fire, heated some water in his tin cup, and mixed it with the cornmeal to make a thin gruel. It was not much, but it was something her stomach might be able to keep down. By the time he returned to her side, her eyes had opened. They were an unusual color, somewhere between green and gold, and they looked up at him with a mixture of confusion and raw fear. She tried to push herself up, her arms shaking with the effort, and Beckett held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Hold on there," he said gently. "You are in no shape to be moving around. I am not going to hurt you. I just want to get some food in you." Her eyes darted from his face to the surrounding landscape and back again, as if she was trying to figure out where she was and how she had gotten there. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. When she finally managed to speak, her voice was so hoarse it was barely more than a whisper. "Where am I?" "About 10 miles south of Bozeman," Beckett replied, keeping his tone calm and even. "I found you in that ditch back there. Can you tell me your name?" She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see the thoughts flickering behind her eyes, could see her trying to decide how much to reveal. Then something in her expression shifted, became closed off and guarded. She shook her head slightly. "I am going to give you some food now," Beckett said, deciding not to push. He had seen that look before, that haunted wariness of someone who had learned the hard way that trust could be dangerous. "Just a little bit at a time. Your stomach will not be able to handle much yet." He helped her sit up, supporting her back with his arm and brought the cup of warm gruel to her lips. She hesitated for only a second before she began to eat, and he could see the desperation in the way she swallowed, fighting the urge to gulp it down too fast. He made her pause between sips, giving her body time to adjust. When the cup was empty, he set it aside and gave her a bit more water. "Thank you," she whispered, and there were tears in her eyes now, sliding down her dirty cheeks. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You nearly did," Beckett said honestly. "How long since you ate?" She shook her head again, and he could see she was struggling to remember. 3 days, maybe 4. I lost track." He did not ask her how she had ended up starving in a dried creek bed in the middle of Montana territory. He did not ask her where she had come from or where she had been trying to go. He did not ask about the bruises he had noticed on her arms or the way her hands trembled even now. Those were her stories to tell if she wanted to, and he was not going to press her for them. "Can you stand?" he asked instead. "There is a ranch about an hour's ride from here. The family that runs it, they are good people. They will let you rest and get your strength back." Fear flashed across her face again, quick and bright. "No, no ranches, no towns, please." Beckett studied her for a moment, weighing his options. He could not just leave her out here, not in her condition, but he also was not going to force her anywhere she did not want to go. He made a decision. "All right," he said. "I have got a small cabin about 2 hours north of here. It is not much, just a place I use when I am checking the northern range, but it has walls and a roof and a proper bed. You can stay there until you are feeling stronger." She looked at him with those strange golden green eyes, searching his face as if trying to determine whether she could trust him. Whatever she saw, there must have satisfied her, because she gave a small nod. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. "You do not even know me." Beckett picked up his hat from where he had set it on the ground and settled it back on his head. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "Do not need to know anything more than that." He could see the relief in her expression, the way her shoulders sagged slightly as if she had been bracing herself for demands or conditions. He helped her to her feet, and when her legs threatened to give out beneath her, he swept her up into his arms again without a word. She was too weak to ride on her own, so he settled her in front of him on his horse, keeping one arm wrapped securely around her waist to hold her steady. They rode north as the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. The woman dozed fitfully against his chest, her body finally giving in to exhaustion now that she was safe and fed. Beckett kept the horse to a steady walk, not wanting to jostle her too much. The Montana landscape rolled past them, all golden grassland and distant mountains, the kind of wild beauty that could kill you if you were not careful but could also steal your breath away if you stopped long enough to really look at it. The cabin came into view just as the sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was small and weathered, built from rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney on one side. It sat in a little hollow surrounded by pine trees, with a creek running nearby that still held water even in the summer heat. Beckett had built it himself 3 years ago, needing a place to stay when his work took him to this part of the territory. He dismounted carefully, then lifted the woman down and carried her inside. The cabin was simple, just one room with a bed in the corner, a table and 2 chairs, a small stove for cooking and heating. He laid her on the bed and lit a lamp, the warm glow pushing back the gathering darkness. "I am going to tend to my horse," he told her. "Then I will make us some proper food. You just rest." She nodded, her eyes already drooping closed again. Beckett went back outside and led his horse to the small lean-to he had built beside the cabin. He unsaddled the animal, rubbed it down, and made sure it had water and feed. The evening was cooling down quickly, the way it always did in Montana once the sun went down. He gathered an armful of firewood from the stack against the cabin wall and carried it inside. The woman was asleep on the bed, curled on her side with one hand tucked under her cheek. In the lamplight, Beckett could see just how young she really was and how much damage had been done to her. Besides the obvious starvation, There were old bruises fading to yellow-green on her arms and what looked like rope burns on her wrists. His jaw tightened, but he pushed down the anger that rose in his chest. Whatever had happened to her, whoever had hurt her, that was in the past. Right now, his job was to help her heal. He built a fire in the stove and put on a pot of water to boil. He had beans and salt pork in his supplies, along with some potatoes that were starting to sprout but were still good. He set about making a simple stew, the kind that would stick to her ribs and give her body the fuel it needed to recover. While it cooked, he heated more water and found a clean cloth, figuring she might want to wash up when she woke. The cabin filled with the smell of cooking food, and after about 20 minutes, he heard her stir. He glanced over and saw her sitting up slowly, looking around the cabin with wide eyes as if trying to orient herself. "How are you feeling?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. "Better," she said, and her voice was stronger now, less of that terrible rasp. "I can actually think straight." "Good. Food will be ready soon. There is water heating if you want to clean up first." She looked down at herself, at her torn and filthy dress, and something like embarrassment crossed her face. "I must look terrible." "You look like someone who has been through hell," Beckett said bluntly. "But you are alive, and that is what matters." He poured some of the hot water into a basin and set it on the small table along with the cloth and a sliver of soap. Then he turned his back to give her some privacy, busying himself with the stew. He heard her move slowly across the room, heard the soft splash of water as she washed her face and arms. "I do not have any clean clothes to offer you," he said, still facing away. "But I have got an extra shirt that will be big on you, but at least it is clean. It is hanging on the peg by the door." "Thank you," she said quietly. "You have been so kind. I do not know how to repay you." "Do not need repayment," Beckett replied. He gave her a few more minutes, then heard her settle into one of the chairs at the table. When he turned around, she was wearing his spare shirt, which hung nearly to her knees. She had managed to wash most of the dirt from her face and had attempted to comb through her tangled hair with her fingers. She looked a bit more human now, though still desperately thin and worn. He ladled stew into 2 bowls and set one in front of her along with a spoon. "Eat slowly," he cautioned. "Your stomach is still getting used to food again." She nodded and took a careful bite, and he watched as her eyes closed in something like bliss at the taste of real food. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the crackle of the fire in the stove. "My name is Natalie," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Natalie Larkin." Beckett looked up and met her eyes. "Beckett Calloway. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Larkin, though I wish the circumstances were better." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Just Natalie is fine. I think we are past formalities, considering you saved my life and all." "Fair enough. And you can call me Beckett, or Beck if you prefer." "Most folks do." She took another spoonful of stew, and he could see her gathering her courage to say something more. "You said you were not going to ask me questions about how I ended up out there." "That is right. Figure you will tell me if and when you are ready. Or not at all. It is your business." Natalie stared down at her bowl, her fingers gripping the spoon tightly. "I need to tell someone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have been carrying it alone for so long, and I think it might break me if I do not let some of it out." Beckett set down his spoon and gave her his full attention. "I am listening, if you want to talk, but only if you want to." She took a shaky breath. "I was married to a man named Gerald Sutton. We had a homestead about 60 miles east of here. Or he had a homestead. I was just his wife, his property, same as the cattle and the chickens." Her voice was bitter, and Beckett could hear the weight of pain behind the words. He did not interrupt, just let her speak at her own pace. "He was not always cruel," Natalie continued. "When we first married 2 years ago, back in Illinois, he He seemed like a good man, hardworking, ambitious, but something changed when we came out here. Maybe it was the isolation, or maybe I just had not seen his true nature before. He started drinking, started hitting me when things did not go his way, started saying terrible things, telling me I was worthless, that I was lucky he kept me around at all. She paused, her hand moving unconsciously to her arm where Beckett had seen the bruises. It got worse over time. He would lock me in the cellar for days if I did something he did not like. He stopped giving me enough food, said I needed to learn discipline. 3 weeks ago, he beat me so badly I could not stand for 2 days, and I realized that if I stayed, he was going to kill me. Maybe not on purpose, but eventually one of those beatings would go too far. Beckett felt a cold anger settling in his gut, but he kept his expression neutral, not wanting to make her stop talking. So I waited until he rode into town for supplies last week, Natalie said. And I ran. I took what little food I could carry, and I just started walking. I did not know where I was going, just knew I had to get away. But I got turned around in the hills. I ran out of food after 3 days, and then water. I kept walking because stopping felt like dying, and then I do not remember much after that, until I woke up and you were there. She finally looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. He will come looking for me. Gerald does not like to lose what he thinks belongs to him, and when he finds me, he will make me pay for leaving. Beckett leaned back in his chair, his mind working through the implications. How far did you walk? I do not know exactly. I was not thinking straight. Maybe 30 miles, maybe more. That is a lot of ground to cover on foot, especially in your condition. Did anyone see you leave? Does he have any idea which direction you went? Natalie shook her head. I do not think so. There were no neighbors close enough to see anything, and I tried to be careful about covering my tracks at first, though I do not know how well I managed. Beckett was quiet for a moment, thinking. Bozeman is the nearest town of any size. If he comes looking, he will probably start there, asking around to see if anyone has seen you. But Bozeman is a big enough place that strangers come and go all the time. And this cabin is not on any official records. I built it myself, and the only people who know about it are a few of the ranchers I work with. So you think I might be safe here? There was a desperate hope in her voice that made Beckett's chest ache. For a while, at least, he said carefully, until you are strong enough to decide what you want to do next. But Natalie, I need you to understand something. If your husband does show up, if he finds you here, I am not going to let him take you. I do not care what the law says about a man's rights over his wife. What he did to you was wrong, and I will not stand by and watch it happen again. She stared at him, something like wonder in her eyes. Why would you do that for me? You do not even know me. Because it is the right thing to do, Beckett said simply, and because I have seen enough cruelty in this world. I am not going to add to it by turning a blind eye. Natalie's eyes filled with tears then, and they spilled over, running down her cheeks. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Beckett did not try to stop her or tell her it was all right. He just let her cry, knowing she probably needed to let it out after holding it in for so long. When the storm passed and she finally lowered her hands, he handed her a clean handkerchief. She wiped her eyes and gave him a watery smile. Thank you, she said, for everything. For finding me, for feeding me, for listening, for not making me go back. You are welcome, Beckett replied. Now finish your stew before it gets cold. You need the strength. They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence, and afterward, Beckett heated more water and washed the dishes while Natalie sat by the fire. She was still weak, he could see, exhaustion pulling at her features. When he had put everything away, he gestured to the bed. You take the bed tonight. I will sleep on the floor. I cannot ask you to do that, Natalie protested. This is your cabin. You are not asking. I am telling you. You need proper rest, and that bed is the most comfortable place in this cabin. Do not argue with me. She looked like she might argue anyway, but then her body betrayed her with a huge yawn. She gave in with a small nod and made her way to the bed, climbing under the rough blankets. Beckett banked the fire in the stove and blew out the lamp, then spread his bedroll on the floor near the door. The cabin fell into darkness, lit only by the faint glow from the stove. Beckett? Natalie's voice came soft through the darkness. Yeah? Do you really think I can be free of him? That I can have a life that is not just surviving from one day to the next? Beckett thought about his answer carefully. I think that freedom is not something someone else can give you. It is something you have to take for yourself. But I also think that everyone deserves a chance at a good life, and I will do whatever I can to help you have that chance. That is a good answer, she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Good night, Beckett. Good night, Natalie. He lay awake for a long time after her breathing had evened out into sleep, staring up at the dark ceiling and thinking about the woman who had stumbled into his life. He had meant what he said about helping her, but he also knew that the situation was complicated. Montana in 1882 still had laws that favored husbands over wives, that treated women as property more often than not. If Gerald Sutton came looking for his wife and found her, he would have the law on his side. But Beckett had not been entirely honest when he said he had no stake in this beyond doing the right thing. There was something about Natalie that had reached past all his carefully constructed walls, something in her courage and her vulnerability that made him want to protect her, to stand between her and anyone who would hurt her. He barely knew her, had only met her that morning, but already he could feel something shifting in his chest, some long-locked door starting to crack open. He told himself it was just compassion, just the natural response to seeing someone in need. But as he finally drifted off to sleep, he knew it was more than that, even if he was not ready to name it yet. The next few days fell into a gentle rhythm. Beckett would wake early and make breakfast, simple fare like fried cornmeal mush or beans and bacon. Natalie's appetite was slowly returning, and he could see her gaining strength hour by hour. After breakfast, he would tend to the chores around the cabin, chopping wood and hauling water, checking his horse and maintaining his tack. Natalie would help where she could, though he had to keep reminding her not to overdo it. In the afternoons, they would sit on the small porch Beckett had built onto the front of the cabin, and they would talk. At first, the conversations were superficial, safe topics like the weather and the landscape, but gradually they began to share more. Natalie told him about her childhood in Illinois, about her mother who had died when she was young, and her father who had remarried a woman who saw Natalie as little more than free labor. She told him about how she had jumped at the chance to marry Gerald and leave, thinking anything would be better than staying in that house. Beckett, in turn, told her about growing up on his family's ranch outside Bozeman, about his father who had taught him to ride and rope and treat animals with respect. He told her about his mother's death from fever when he was 15, and how his father had followed her 2 years later, some said from a broken heart. He told her about selling the ranch because he could not bear to live there without them, and how he had been drifting ever since, taking odd jobs and working for various outfits, never staying in one place too long. You sound lonely, Natalie observed one afternoon. They were sitting on the porch steps, watching the sun filter through the pine trees. It had been 5 days since he had found her, and the color was returning to her cheeks. She was still too thin, but she no longer looked like she might blow away in a strong wind. Maybe I am, Beckett admitted. Never thought about it much. Just kept moving, kept working. Seemed easier than stopping and thinking about what I did not have. I understand that, Natalie said quietly. I spent 2 years with Gerald trying not to think about what my life had become, trying not to admit to myself that I had made a terrible mistake. It is easier to just survive day by day than to look at the bigger picture and realize how trapped you are. Beckett glanced over at her. You are not trapped anymore. No, she agreed. But I do not know what I am instead. Free, I suppose. But free to do what? I have no money, no family, no skills beyond cooking and cleaning. What kind of life can I make for myself? Any kind you want, Beckett said. It might not be easy, but it is possible. There are women out here who run their own businesses, their own ranches. It is harder for a woman than a man, I will not lie about that. But it can be done. Natalie was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. What do you want, Beckett? If you could have any kind of life, what would it look like? The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that in years. He thought about it, really thought about it, and was surprised by the answer that rose in his mind. I think I would want a ranch again, he said slowly. Not a big operation, just something small and manageable. Enough cattle to make a living, some horses, a good house with a solid roof. Maybe a family, though I never thought too hard about that part. Just a place that was mine, where I could put down roots and stay. That sounds nice, Natalie said softly. Peaceful. What about you? What would your life look like if you could choose? She smiled, but there was sadness in it. I used to dream about having a home where I felt safe, where I could wake up in the morning without being afraid of what the day would bring. I wanted children someday, but not with Gerald. I wanted a partner, someone who would see me as an equal, not property. I wanted to laugh again, to feel joy without it being snatched away. Small dreams, maybe, but they were mine. Those are not small dreams, Beckett said firmly. Those are the most important kind, and there is no reason you cannot have them. Natalie, you are young, you are smart, you are strong. You survived something that would have broken a lot of people. That takes courage. She looked at him, and something in her expression made his breath catch. You make me believe it might be possible. When you talk like that, I can almost see it. A future that is not just about running and hiding. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Then Natalie looked away, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, and the spell was broken. I should start dinner, she said, standing up. You have been doing all the cooking, and I think I am finally strong enough to help. They made dinner together that evening, moving around the small cabin in an easy coordination that felt natural despite having known each other for less than a week. Natalie made biscuits while Beckett fried salt pork and put together a pan of greens from the wild plants he had gathered near the creek. They ate as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and talked about nothing important, just the easy conversation of two people who were becoming comfortable with each other. That night, as Beckett lay on his bedroll on the floor, he found himself thinking about the future in a way he had not in years. For so long, he had just been drifting, taking each day as it came without any real plan or purpose. But now, with Natalie sleeping peacefully in the bed across the room, he found himself imagining what it might be like to have someone to build a life with, someone to share the burden and the joy of making a home. He told himself he was getting ahead of things, that it was too soon to be thinking like that. But the thoughts kept coming anyway, and he fell asleep with a smile on his face. The tranquility of their routine was shattered on the 8th day. Beckett had ridden out early that morning to check on a herd belonging to one of the ranchers who employed him, leaving Natalie at the cabin with strict instructions to stay inside and keep the door barred. He had not wanted to leave her alone, but he had responsibilities he could not ignore forever, and he needed to maintain his normal patterns so as not to raise suspicions. He had been gone for about 4 hours when he started back toward the cabin, his saddlebags loaded with supplies he had picked up from the ranch. The day was hot and clear, and he was thinking about the dinner Natalie had promised to make when he got back, something involving the wild onions they had found near the creek. He was still about a half-mile from the cabin when he saw the smoke. His heart stopped for a moment, then kicked into overdrive. He spurred his horse into a gallop, racing through the trees toward the cabin. As he got closer, he could see that the smoke was not coming from the cabin itself, but from somewhere nearby. He could also hear shouting. Beckett pulled his rifle from its scabbard and approached more cautiously, using the trees for cover. As he got closer, he could see a man standing near the cabin, big and burly with a red face and an angry set to his shoulders. The man was yelling, his words carrying through the still air. I know you are in there, Natalie. You think you can run from me? You think you can make a fool out of me? Open this door right now, or I swear to God, I will burn this whole place down with you in it. Gerald Sutton. It had to be. Beckett felt rage boiling up in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm and think. The smoke was coming from a pile of brush the man had lit near the woodpile, far enough from the cabin that it was not an immediate threat, but close enough to be a clear message. The door was still barred, and through the window, Beckett could see Natalie's face, pale and terrified. He circled around through the trees coming up behind Gerald. When he was about 20 yards away, he levered around into the rifle and called out in a voice that cut through the air like a whip. Step away from the cabin! Gerald spun around, his hand dropping to the pistol at his hip, but he froze when he saw Beckett standing there with the rifle trained on his chest. His face went from red to purple, and his eyes were wild. Who the hell are you? Gerald demanded. This is none of your business. That is my wife in there, and I have got every right to take her home. I said step away from the cabin, Beckett repeated, his voice cold and level. And put out that fire before it spreads. You cannot tell me what to do, Gerald snarled. That woman belongs to me. The law says so. If you are hiding her, that makes you a criminal. Beckett took a few steps closer, the rifle never wavering. The law also says you cannot set fires on other people's property, and it says you cannot threaten to burn someone alive. Now I am going to give you one more chance to step away from that cabin and put out that fire. If you do not, I am going to make you, and I promise you will not like how I do it. For a moment, Gerald looked like he might try to draw his pistol anyway, but something in Beckett's eyes must have convinced him that would be a fatal mistake. With visible reluctance, he moved away from the door and kicked dirt over the small fire until it was smothered. There, he said, his voice dripping with resentment. Happy? Now tell my wife to come out here. She is not going anywhere with you, Beckett said flatly. Get on your horse and ride out of here. Do not come back. Gerald's face twisted with fury. You cannot keep her from me. She is my wife. I will go to the law, and they will make you give her back. Go ahead, Beckett said. Tell the law how you beat her, how you starved her, how you locked her in a cellar. Tell them how I found her more dead than alive, because she was so desperate to get away from you that she walked into the wilderness with nothing. See how sympathetic they are. She is a liar, Gerald spat. She probably told you all sorts of stories, made herself out to be the victim. But she is the one who is lazy, who is disobedient, who needed to be disciplined. Beckett felt his finger tighten on the trigger, felt the rage threatening to overwhelm his control, but he forced himself to breathe, to stay calm. I am not going to argue with you. You have got 1 minute to get on your horse and leave. If you are still here after that, I will shoot you for trespassing and arson, and no jury in Montana will convict me. The two men stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Then Gerald's eyes slid past Beckett to the cabin, and his expression turned calculating. Fine, he said, holding up his hands. I am going, but this is not over. She is still my wife, and I will get her back one way or another. And when I do, she is going to pay for every day of trouble she has caused me. He walked to his horse, which was tied to a tree about 30 yards away, and climbed into the saddle. But before he rode off, he looked back at Beckett with pure hatred in his eyes. You are making a big mistake, friend. Interfering in a man's marriage, that is serious business. You will regret this. The only thing I regret is not pulling this trigger, Beckett replied. Now get off my property before I change my mind. Gerald spurred his horse and rode off, crashing through the underbrush. Beckett stood there with the rifle still raised until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Then he finally lowered the weapon and turned toward the cabin. The door flew open and Natalie came running out, her face streaked with tears. She threw herself into his arms, and he held her tight, feeling her whole body shaking. "I thought he was going to kill me," she sobbed into his chest. "I thought he was going to burn down the cabin, and I would have nowhere to run. How did he find me? How did he know I was here?" "I do not know," Beckett said, stroking her hair. "But it is all right now. He is gone." "But he will come back," Natalie said, pulling back to look up at him. "You heard what he said. He will come back, or he will go to the law, and they will make me go with him." Beckett cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me. I am not going to let that happen. I promised you that I would not let him take you, and I meant it. We will figure this out together." "How?" Natalie's voice was desperate. "What can we do? The law is on his side. A woman cannot just leave her husband, not legally. They will say I am his property, that he has the right to discipline me however he sees fit." Beckett was quiet for a moment, his mind racing through possibilities. Then an idea began to form, risky and complicated, but maybe the only way out. "There might be a way," he said slowly, "but you would have to trust me completely. And it would mean making some big changes to both our lives." Natalie searched his face. "What are you thinking?" "Montana has a divorce law in the books," Beckett said. "It is not easy to get a divorce, and it takes time, but it is possible. The grounds for divorce include extreme cruelty and abandonment. If we can get you to a lawyer, someone who is willing to take your case and fight for you, we might be able to make it stick." "But that could take months," Natalie said, "maybe even years. And in the meantime, Gerald could find me again. He could drag me back before the divorce goes through." "That is why you would need to stay hidden," Beckett said. "Stay somewhere he could not find you, somewhere safe. And that is where the complicated part comes in." He took a deep breath, knowing what he was about to suggest would change everything. "You could stay with me, not here at the cabin. That is obviously not safe anymore. But I have been thinking about buying some land, starting that ranch I told you about. If I did that, if I had a homestead, you could stay there. We could tell people you are my wife. It would give you legal protection, a reason to be there that no one would question. And when the divorce finally comes through, you would be free." Natalie stared at him, her eyes wide. "You would do that? You would pretend to be married to me? Take on all that risk just to keep me safe?" "It would not be just for you," Beckett said honestly. "I meant what I said about wanting a ranch. This would give me a reason to finally stop drifting and build something. And having you there, having someone to help work the land and build a home, that would make it easier. We would be helping each other." "But what if Gerald finds out it is fake? What if he challenges it?" "Then we make it real," Beckett said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "If we actually got married, legally married, that would supersede his claim. You cannot be married to two people at once. Your marriage to him would have to be dissolved first, and that would strengthen your case for divorce based on his cruelty. It is not a perfect solution, and it would take time to sort out all the legal details, but it would give you protection right now, today." Natalie was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face again. "I cannot ask you to do that. Marriage is not something to be taken lightly. You should not have to tie yourself to me, to my problems, just to keep me safe. You are not asking. I am offering." Beckett took her hands in his, feeling how cold they were despite the summer heat. "Natalie, I am not going to lie and say I have not been thinking about this. About you, these past 8 days, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your courage. It has made me realize how empty my life has been. How much I have been just going through the motions without really living." He paused, trying to find the right words. "I am not saying I am in love with you. It is too soon for that, and you have been through too much to be thinking about romance. But I am saying I care about what happens to you. And I am saying that if we did this, if we built a life together, I would do my best to make it a good one." I would be a real partner to you, not like Gerald. I would never hurt you or belittle you or make you feel small. That is a promise. Natalie was crying openly now, but there was something besides fear in her eyes. There was hope, fragile and tentative, but real. You really mean it? She whispered. You would marry me, knowing all my mess, all the complications? I really mean it, Beckett confirmed. But only if that is what you want. I am not going to pressure you. If you would rather we stick with the original plan, pretend to be married while we work on getting your divorce, I will do that. Or if you want to try something else entirely, we will figure it out. The choice is yours, Natalie. I am just giving you options. She stood there for a long moment, her hands still clasped in his, her eyes searching his face as if trying to read his soul. Then she took a deep, shaky breath and nodded. Let us do it, she said. Let us get married for real. If you are willing to take that risk for me, then I am willing to take it with you. And maybe, if we are both very lucky, we can make something good out of this mess. Beckett felt something in his chest expand, warm and bright. He pulled her into another hug, and this time when he held her, it felt different. It felt like a promise. All right then, he said against her hair. We will ride into Bozeman tomorrow. Find a preacher, make it legal, and then we will start looking for land. Start building that future we both want. Natalie nodded against his chest. Together, together, Beckett agreed. They spent the rest of that day preparing. Beckett packed up everything from the cabin that they would need, loading it onto his horse. Natalie washed and mended her dress as best she could, wanting to look presentable for the ceremony, even if it was just a simple affair. As evening fell, they sat together on the porch one last time, watching the stars come out. Are you scared? Natalie asked quietly. A little, Beckett admitted. Change is always scary, even when it is good change. But I am more excited than scared. That probably sounds strange, given everything that has happened. No, it does not sound strange at all, Natalie said. I am scared too, but I am also more hopeful than I have been in years. You gave me that, Beckett. You gave me hope when I thought I had none left. He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They sat like that in the darkness, holding hands and watching the stars, and Beckett thought about all the ways life could surprise you. A week ago, he had been alone, drifting from job to job with no real purpose. Now he was about to get married and start a ranch and build a whole new life. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. They rode into Bozeman just after noon the next day. The town was bustling, full of miners and ranchers and settlers, all going about their business in the summer heat. Beckett kept a careful eye out as they rode down the main street, watching for any sign of Gerald Sutton. But the man was nowhere to be seen, and Beckett allowed himself to relax slightly. They found a small church on the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with a cross on the steeple. The preacher was an older man with kind eyes and a welcoming smile. Beckett explained their situation, leaving out the more complicated details about Gerald, and the preacher agreed to perform the ceremony that very afternoon. Do you have rings? The preacher asked. Beckett shook his head, then paused. Wait, actually, I do. He dug into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were 2 gold rings, simple bands that had belonged to his parents. He had carried them with him since his father died, unable to sell them but not sure why he was keeping them. Now he knew. They were my parents, he told Natalie, holding them out. I know it is not traditional to use someone else's wedding rings, but they would have liked you. They would have wanted you to have them. Natalie's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the rings. Are you sure? I am sure, Beckett said firmly. They represent something good, something lasting. That is what I want for us. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They stood in the small church with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, and they made their vows to each other, to love and honor, to stand by each other through good times and bad, to build a life together based on trust and respect. When Beckett slipped his father's ring onto Natalie's finger, and she slipped his mother's ring onto his, it felt right in a way he could not quite explain. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said with a smile. "You may kiss your bride." Beckett looked at Natalie, suddenly nervous. They had not discussed this part, but she smiled up at him, a real smile that reached her eyes, and she nodded slightly. He leaned down and kissed her gently, just a soft press of lips that was more about sealing a promise than passion. When he pulled back, her cheeks were flushed and her eyes were bright. "Hello, husband," she said softly. "Hello, wife," Beckett replied, and they both laughed, giddy with the enormity of what they had just done. They spent the next few days in Bozeman, staying at a respectable boarding house and making plans. Beckett visited a lawyer, an older gentleman named Harrison, who had a reputation for taking on difficult cases. He explained Natalie's situation, the abuse she had suffered, and her need for a divorce from Gerald Sutton. Harrison listened carefully, asked a lot of questions, and finally agreed to take the case. "It is going to be an uphill battle," Harrison warned. "The law favors husbands in these matters, and judges can be reluctant to dissolve marriages even when there is clear evidence of cruelty. But Montana is changing slowly. We have got some progressive voices pushing for better protections for women. If we can document the abuse, get testimony from reliable witnesses, we might have a chance." "How long will it take?" Beckett asked. "Months at least, possibly over a year. These things do not move quickly. In the meantime, the fact that you two are legally married complicates things from a legal standpoint, but it also gives Mrs. Calloway some protection. Sutton cannot simply drag her off claiming she is his wife when she has legal documents showing she is married to you." It was not perfect, but it was something. They signed the papers and paid Harrison's retainer, and then they turned their attention to finding land. Beckett had saved most of his earnings over the past 6 years, living simply and spending little. He had enough to make a down payment on a decent piece of property, and after looking at several options, they found one that felt right. It was about 15 miles northwest of Bozeman, 160 acres with good water, decent grass for grazing, and a stand of timber for building. There was no house yet, but there was a small barn that the previous owner had started before moving on. "We could make this work," Natalie said, standing in the middle of the property and looking around with shining eyes. "It is beautiful here." "It will be a lot of work," Beckett cautioned. "Building a house, getting cattle, breaking horses. It will take everything we have." "I am not afraid of hard work," Natalie replied. "I am afraid of going back to a life where I have no say, no choices. This is a chance to build something that is ours, together, that is worth working for." They bought the land and immediately set to work. For the first few weeks, they lived in the barn, sleeping in the hayloft and cooking over a campfire. Beckett began marking out where the house would go, planning a modest structure that would be comfortable and solid. Natalie helped where she could, hauling stones for the foundation and clearing brush from the building site. As they worked side by side, something began to shift between them. The marriage had started as a practical arrangement, a way to keep Natalie safe and give Beckett a reason to settle down. But as the days turned into weeks, they began to truly know each other. They learned each other's habits and quirks, their strengths and weaknesses. They learned how to work together, how to communicate without words when words were not enough. Beckett found himself watching Natalie when she did not know he was looking, noticing the way she smiled when she saw a beautiful sunset, the way she hummed while she worked, the quiet strength in the set of her shoulders. She was healing, he could see it. The haunted look in her eyes was fading, replaced by something brighter and more hopeful. Natalie, for her part, found herself drawn to Beckett in ways that surprised her. She had not thought she would ever want to be close to a man again after Gerald, but Beckett was so different. He was patient and kind, never raising his voice or his hand. He asked her opinion on things, listened when she spoke, treated her like an equal partner rather than property. And slowly, carefully, she began to let down the walls she had built around her heart. One evening, about 2 months after their marriage, they were sitting by the campfire after a long day of work. The frame of the house was starting to take shape, and they could finally see what it would become. Natalie was mending one of Beckett's shirts, and he was working on a piece of harness that needed repair. "Can I ask you something?" Natalie said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Of course," Beckett replied, looking up from his work. "Do you ever regret this? Marrying me, taking on all my problems, giving up your freedom?" Beckett set down the harness and turned to face her fully. "Not even for a second." "Natalie, this is the most alive I have felt in years. Yeah, it is hard work and there are complications we are still dealing with, but it is real, it matters, and I would rather have a hard, real life with you than an easy, empty one alone." Natalie's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I feel the same way. I was so afraid when we first got married that I was just using you, that I was taking advantage of your kindness. But now I realize that what we have is real. It is not just an arrangement anymore, at least not for me." "Not for me either," Beckett said quietly. He moved closer to her, and she set down the mending. "Natalie, I did not want to push you, did not want to make you feel like you owed me anything. But I need you to know that what I feel for you has changed. It has grown into something deeper. I love you. I am in love with you." Natalie's breath caught. "Oh, Beckett, I love you too. I think I have been falling for you since that first day, when you could have asked me all those questions but chose not to. When you treated me like a person worthy of respect instead of just a problem to solve." He reached up and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing away the tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Can I kiss you? Really kiss you, not like at the wedding? Please," she whispered. He leaned in and kissed her, and this time there was nothing tentative or uncertain about it. It was a kiss full of promise and passion, of all the feelings they had been holding back for weeks. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "That was worth waiting for," Natalie said with a shaky laugh. "It really was," Beckett agreed. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers, both of them feeling like they had finally found the place they belonged. The house was finished by October, just before the first real cold snap hit Montana. It was not fancy, just 4 rooms and a loft, but it was sturdy and warm and theirs. They had a parlor with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a proper stove that Beckett had bought in town, and a bedroom that Natalie had made cozy with quilts and curtains sewn from fabric she had carefully chosen. On the first night in their new house, they lay together in their bed, listening to the wind outside and the crackle of the fire in the next room. Natalie was curled against Beckett's side, her head on his chest, and he was running his fingers through her hair. "We did it," she said softly. "We built a home." "We did," Beckett agreed. "And this is just the beginning. Next spring we will get cattle, and I have been thinking about horses. I am good with horses. We could start a breeding program, sell them to the army and the ranches." "I think that is a wonderful idea," Natalie said. "I was thinking I could start a garden, maybe sell vegetables and preserves in town. Every little bit of income will help while we are getting established." They talked late into the night, making plans and dreaming about the future. And when they finally made love for the first time, it was tender and sweet and full of all the emotions they had been building toward for months. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Natalie felt a peace she had never known before. "Thank you," she whispered against Beckett's skin. "For what?" he murmured, half asleep. "For finding me, for saving me, for giving me this life." Beckett tightened his arms around her. "You saved yourself, Natalie. You had the courage to run, to fight for your life. I just helped you along the way, but the strength was always yours." She fell asleep smiling, feeling truly safe for the first time in years. The winter was hard but manageable. They had plenty of firewood and supplies, and the house kept them warm even when the snow piled high outside. Beckett made occasional trips into town for necessities, always careful and watchful in case Gerald Sutton was around. But there had been no sign of the man since that day at the cabin, and slowly they began to relax. In February, the lawyer Harrison sent word that he had filed the divorce petition and that Gerald had been served with papers. Gerald had contested it, as expected, claiming that Natalie was lying about the abuse and that she had abandoned him without cause. But Harrison had been gathering evidence, talking to neighbors near the old homestead who had heard screaming and seen Natalie's injuries. It was not a sure thing, but the case was moving forward. Spring came early that year, and with it came a new kind of hope. Beckett bought their first cattle, 20 head to start, and he and Natalie spent long days repairing fences and building up the herd. They also bought 2 mares, both pregnant, and Beckett began his plans for the horse breeding operation. Natalie planted a huge garden, and she spent hours tending it, watching things grow with a satisfaction that filled her heart. She had never had a garden of her own before, never had the freedom to plant what she wanted and nurture it into being. It felt like a metaphor for her whole life now, she thought. She was planting seeds and watching them grow into something beautiful. In June, they received news that made Natalie cry with relief. The judge had granted her divorce from Gerald Sutton on the grounds of extreme cruelty. Gerald had tried to fight it, but the testimony from neighbors and the evidence of Natalie's injuries when Beckett had found her had been compelling. The marriage was dissolved, and Natalie was legally free. "It is really over," she said, holding the legal papers in her trembling hands. "He has no claim on me anymore." "It is over," Beckett confirmed, pulling her into his arms. "You are free, Natalie. You are your own person, and you are my wife by choice, not by necessity. Our marriage is still valid, though, right?" Natalie asked, sudden worry in her voice. "We do not have to get married again?" "No, our marriage is legally sound," Beckett assured her. Harrison checked all the details. "You were not legally married to Gerald anymore once our marriage was recorded, which meant his claim was void. It is complicated legal stuff, but the bottom line is that we are married fair and square, and nobody can challenge that." Natalie let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Good, because I do not want to be married to anyone else. Just you." "Just me," Beckett said, kissing her forehead. "Forever." As summer turned toward fall, Natalie began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited to be sure, watching for the signs her body was giving her. When she finally knew for certain, she planned how to tell Beckett. She wanted it to be special, a moment they would both remember. She chose a warm September evening when they were sitting on the porch they had built onto the front of the house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. She had made his favorite dinner, pot roast with vegetables from her garden, and they had eaten on the porch, enjoying the last of the warm weather before winter came. "Beckett," she said, reaching over to take his hand, "I have something to tell you." He looked over at her, and something in her expression must have alerted him because his eyes went wide. "Are you?" She nodded, unable to keep the smile off her face. "We are going to have a baby. In the spring, I think. Around April." For a moment, Beckett just stared at her. Then he let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed. He set her down carefully, as if she had suddenly become fragile, and then he knelt in front of her and placed his hands gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Natalie asked, even though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Beckett said, looking up at her. "Natalie, you have given me everything. A home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I did not even know I could be this happy." "You gave me those things too," Natalie said, running her fingers through his hair. "You gave me life itself when I was ready to give up. You gave me a reason to hope again. This baby is a symbol of everything we have built together." That winter, as Natalie's belly grew round with their child, they prepared for the new arrival. Beckett built a cradle from wood he had been carefully seasoning, carving it with intricate designs of horses and mountains. Natalie sewed tiny clothes and blankets, working by lamplight in the evenings while Beckett read to her from the books he had bought in town. They talked about names, throwing out ideas and debating the merits of each one. They talked about what kind of parents they wanted to be, how they would raise their child with love and respect, and the freedom to become whoever they were meant to be. They talked about expanding the house someday, adding more rooms for more children if they were blessed with them. And through it all, their love continued to deepen. They had started as strangers thrown together by circumstance, but they had become true partners, true soulmates. The physical attraction was certainly there, had grown stronger as Natalie healed and let herself truly feel again. But it was more than that. They were best friends, confidants, the person the other turned to in joy and in sorrow. In April of 1884, just as the first wildflowers were beginning to bloom in the meadows around their ranch, Natalie went into labor. Beckett rode hard for the nearest neighbor, a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had delivered many babies in her time. She came back with him and took charge of the situation with calm efficiency. The labor was long and difficult, as first births often are. Beckett stayed by Natalie's side the whole time, holding her hand and giving her water and telling her how strong she was, how proud he was of her. And finally, just as the sun was rising on a beautiful spring morning, their son was born. He was perfect, with a thatch of dark hair and lungs that could wake the whole county. Beckett held him for the first time with tears streaming down his face, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes, the little face that was already so dear to him. "Hello, little man," he whispered. "I am your father. And I promise you, I am going to spend every day of my life making sure you know you are loved." They named him Benjamin, after Beckett's father, with the middle name of Lucas, after Natalie's father. Benjamin Lucas Calloway, born healthy and strong on an April morning in Montana, the first child of a love that had been forged in hardship and had grown into something unbreakable. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch prospered, with the cattle herd growing and the horse breeding program becoming known throughout the territory. Beckett's horses were sought after for their intelligence and endurance, and he took pride in every animal he raised. Natalie's garden became famous in Bozeman, and she sold her vegetables and preserves at the market, using the money to buy little luxuries for the house and save for their children's futures. Benjamin was joined by a sister, Emily Rose, 2 years later, and then another brother, Thomas James, 2 years after that. The house rang with the sounds of children's laughter, and Beckett and Natalie watched their family grow with joy and gratitude. They had their challenges, of course. There were years when the weather was bad and the cattle did not thrive. There were times when money was tight and they had to make do with less. There were illnesses and injuries, the normal trials of life on a ranch, but they faced everything together, their partnership only growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame. Gerald Sutton, they heard through the grapevine, had left Montana not long after the divorce was finalized. Some said he had gone to California, others said he had headed north to Canada. Natalie did not care where he went, as long as it was far away from her. She rarely thought of him anymore, those dark days feeling like a different life entirely. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Beckett took Natalie on a picnic to the spot where they had decided to buy the land for their ranch. The children were with Mrs. Patterson for the day, and it was just the two of them, like it had been in those early days. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Natalie asked, leaning against Beckett's shoulder as they sat on a blanket and looked out over the land they had built together. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you found me in that ditch, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." "Both, I think," Beckett said, his arm around her. "We have lived a lot of life in these 10 years, built a lot of dreams into reality. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had ridden a different route that day?" Natalie asked. "If you had not found me?" Beckett was quiet for a moment, considering. "I do not think I would have found what I was looking for. I did not even know I was looking for anything, did not know what I was missing. But when I found you, everything clicked into place. You were what I needed, Natalie, not just to save or protect, but to love and build a life with. Natalie turned to face him, her eyes bright with emotion. You saved my life that day, but you gave me so much more than just survival. You gave me a reason to live, a reason to hope, a reason to believe that good things were possible. You gave me love without conditions, partnership without control. You gave me 3 beautiful children and a home and a life that is more than I ever dreamed possible. We gave those things to each other, Beckett corrected gently. This life, this love, it is not something I did for you or you did for me. It is something we built together, stone by stone, day by day. And I would not change a single moment of it. They kissed there in the sunshine, surrounded by the land they had tamed and the life they had created. And when they finally packed up and headed back to the house, hand in hand, they knew that whatever the future brought, they would face it together. The children grew as children do. Benjamin became a skilled horseman like his father, with a gentle way with animals that made him a natural. Emily was clever and quick, with a head for numbers that suggested she might one day help run the business side of the ranch. Thomas was the quiet one, happiest with a book in his hands, and Beckett and Natalie made sure to encourage his love of learning, even as they taught him the practical skills he would need. When Benjamin turned 16, he asked his father about the story of how his parents had met. Beckett and Natalie had never hidden the truth from their children, but they had waited until they were old enough to understand the complexity of it. They told him the story one evening, sitting around the fire in the parlor, about how Beckett had found Natalie more dead than alive, about the cruel husband she had fled from, about the risks they had taken to build a life together. Benjamin listened with wide eyes, and when they finished, he looked at his mother with new respect. You were so brave, Ma, he said quietly, to leave like that, not knowing if you would survive. I was desperate, Natalie corrected. Bravery came later, when I had to learn to trust again, to believe that not all men were like Gerald. Your father taught me that. He showed me what real partnership looks like, what real love is. And your mother taught me that love is not just a feeling, Beckett added. It is a choice you make every day. To stand by someone, to work through the hard times, to build something lasting. We chose each other, and we keep choosing each other. Benjamin nodded, processing this. I hope I can find something like what you two have someday. You will, Natalie said with confidence. You have been raised to respect people, to value kindness and partnership. Those lessons will serve you well. More years passed, and the children began to leave home one by one. Benjamin took over more of the day-to-day running of the ranch, though Beckett still worked alongside him every day. Emily married a school teacher and moved to Bozeman, where she opened a small business selling dry goods. Thomas went to university back east, his letters home full of excitement about his studies. Beckett and Natalie found themselves alone in the house more often, and they discovered that they enjoyed this new phase of life as much as they had enjoyed raising their children. They took long walks together, sat on the porch in the evenings talking about everything and nothing, and fell in love with each other all over again in the quiet moments. On their 25th anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, they renewed their vows. It was a small ceremony held at the ranch, with a minister from town officiating and their family bearing witness. When Beckett slipped a new ring onto Natalie's finger, one he had specially made with a small diamond he had saved for years to afford, she cried happy tears. 25 years ago, I made vows to you out of necessity, Beckett said, speaking from the heart. I meant them then, but I did not fully understand what they would come to mean. Now, after building a life with you, after loving you through joy and sorrow, through good times and hard times, I make these vows again with full knowledge of what they mean. I choose you, Natalie. I will always choose you. And I choose you, Natalie replied, her voice strong and clear. You found me when I was lost, fed me when I was starving, gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. But more than that, you gave me the freedom to become myself, to discover who I was beyond survival. You gave me love without chains, partnership without domination. You are my best friend, my partner, my love, and I will choose you every day for the rest of my life. As they kissed to seal their renewed vows, their family applauded and cheered. The celebration went long into the evening with food and music and stories. And as Beckett and Natalie danced together under the stars, their children and grandchildren watching with smiles, they knew that they had truly built something lasting. We did all right, did we not? Beckett murmured in Natalie's ear as they swayed together. We did more than all right, Natalie replied. We did amazing. We built a life, raised a family, created a legacy, and we did it all together. Together, Beckett agreed. Always together. The years continued to roll by, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. There were new grandchildren born, and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under Benjamin's management, though Beckett still helped out as much as his aging body would allow. Natalie spent her later years tending her garden and teaching her granddaughters to sew and cook and preserve food for the winter. When Beckett was 72 and Natalie was 68, they celebrated their 45th anniversary. They were sitting on the porch, the same spot where they had spent so many evenings over the years, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. Do you remember that first night? Natalie asked, her hand in Beckett's. When you found me and fed me and asked for no story? I remember, Beckett said. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, and I was right. You were pretty brave yourself, Natalie said with a smile. Taking in a stranger, risking everything to keep me safe, marrying me when you barely knew me. Best decision I ever made, Beckett said firmly. Saved us both, I think. I was lost before you, just drifting. You gave me an anchor, a reason to stay in one place and build something real. Natalie leaned her head on his shoulder, the way she had done thousands of times over the years. We saved each other. We did, Beckett agreed. And look at what we built. Look at all of this. He gestured to the ranch spread out before them, to the house they had built with their own hands, to the land they had worked and loved. In the distance, they could see Benjamin teaching his own son how to rope a calf. Closer to the house, Emily's children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. It is a good life, Natalie said softly. Better than anything I could have imagined that day when you found me. I was so lost, so broken, and you put me back together piece by piece. You did most of the work yourself, Beckett reminded her. I just gave you a safe place to heal. You gave me more than that, Natalie insisted. You gave me love, real, lasting love, the kind that weathers storms and grows stronger with time. Not everyone gets that, Beckett. We are lucky. We are, he agreed. So damn lucky. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. The air was cooling, the way it always did in Montana evenings, but they were warm, wrapped in blankets and in each other's presence. I love you, Natalie said, the words as natural as breathing after all these years. I love you too, Beckett replied, more than anything in this world. And there, on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love well earned, Beckett and Natalie Calloway watched the stars come out and counted their blessings. They had started with nothing but desperation and hope, but they had built a legacy that would outlast them both. Their story was one of survival and salvation, of courage and commitment, of two broken souls who had found each other and had chosen to heal together. It was a love story forged in the wilds of Montana, tempered by hardship and strengthened by devotion. And it was far from over, because true love never really ends. It just transforms, becoming part of the very fabric of the land and the family it creates. As the years wound down and their bodies grew frail, Beckett and Natalie faced the end of their earthly journey with the same partnership that had defined their entire marriage. When Beckett passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Natalie mourned him deeply but without regret. They had been given more time together than many couples ever dreamed of, and they had used every precious moment. She joined him just 2 years later, slipping away quietly in the spring, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her last words were a smile and a whisper. "I am coming, Beck. Wait for me." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch under a pair of cottonwood trees they had planted together 50 years before. The stone marking their final resting place bore simple words: Beckett Calloway, 1855, 1933. Natalie Calloway, 1859, 1935, together always. And the ranch they had built continued on, passed down through the generations, each one knowing the story of how it had all begun. How a cowboy on a lonely trail had found a woman starving in a ditch by the road, had fed her, and asked for no story, and in doing so had found the love of his life. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest loves begin with the simplest acts of kindness, and that the choice to help a stranger can change not just one life, but generations to come. It was a testament to the power of compassion and the strength of commitment, a love story written in the dust and glory of the Montana frontier. And even now, decades after they are gone, people in Bozeman still tell the story of Beckett and Natalie Calloway, of the love that began with a rescue and grew into a legacy. Young couples starting out visit their graves, drawn by the romance of their story and the hope it represents, that even from the darkest beginnings, with courage and love and determination, something beautiful can grow. The ranch still stands, now run by Beckett and Natalie's great-great-grandchildren, who honor their ancestors' memory by treating the land and each other with the same respect and love that built the foundation generations ago. The house has been expanded and modernized, but the original 4 rooms remain, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. And sometimes on quiet evenings when the wind whispers through the cottonwoods, visitors swear they can see 2 figures on the old porch, sitting side by side and watching the sunset, their hands clasped together the way they were in life. Whether it is ghost or memory, or simply the power of a love so strong it has soaked into the very boards of the house, no one can say. But what everyone agrees on is this: the story of Beckett and Natalie Calloway is proof that true love exists, that people can overcome the worst circumstances and build lives of meaning and beauty. It is a story that gives hope to the broken and courage to the afraid. It reminds us that we all have the power to change someone's life with a simple act of kindness, and that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected beginnings. He found her starving in a ditch by the road. The cowboy fed her and asked for no story. And from that simple beginning, a love grew that would span nearly half a century and create a legacy that endures to this day. It is a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, but timeless in its message. That love can heal, that partnership can empower, and that together, 2 people can build something that lasts far beyond their own lifetimes. Their story ended not with tragedy or separation, but with the peaceful conclusion of 2 lives well lived, 2 hearts that had beat as one for over 4 decades. They had started as strangers, become partners out of necessity, and grown into soulmates through choice and commitment. They had faced hardships and celebrated triumphs, raised children and built a home, and through it all, their love had only grown deeper and stronger. And so, under the vast Montana sky that had witnessed their first meeting and their final days, Beckett and Natalie Calloway rest together, their story complete, their love eternal. They had taken the hand that fate dealt them and played it with courage, grace, and unwavering devotion to each other. In doing so, they created not just a family or a ranch, but a living testament to the transformative power of love. The end.